stole those sneakers, didn't you?
No, sir, I didn't steal anything. I bought them. You got the receipt right here.
Those cost over $15,000. There's no way someone like you could afford that. Stop lying, boy.
I paid for them, officer. I saved for 10 months. My parents helped with the rest.
Yeah, right. Look at him. Dressed like that with that old backpack. Kids your age don't just walk out with 15.
Philip Worrell was 18 years old. He had a receipt in his pocket, a shopping bag in his hand, and a bus to catch. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He wasn't acting suspiciously. He was sitting at a bus stop on a Saturday afternoon, quietly proud of a purchase that had taken him 10 months to earn. And within minutes of sitting down, a woman who couldn't afford what he had just bought decided he must have stolen it, and called the police to prove it. What happened next would be recorded by bystanders, reviewed by attorneys, and eventually decided by a jury. And the people who were so certain Philip couldn't have earned those sneakers would learn, at significant cost, exactly what he was capable of. Before the full story unfolds, drop in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? We read every single one. And if you believe an 18-year-old who worked 10 months and saved thousands of dollars should be able to spend his own money without being treated like a criminal, hit like and subscribe. Now, here's exactly what happened. The afternoon Philip Worrell sat down at the bus stop outside Elite Soul Gallery. The city was moving at its usual Saturday pace, foot traffic on the sidewalk, cars rolling slow through the intersection, the kind of ordinary noise that asks nothing of anyone. Philip had been inside that store less than 20 minutes earlier. He had walked out holding a branded shopping bag, sent a photo of it to his parents, and settled onto the bench with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just closed a chapter he had been writing for a very long time. Officer Victor Perry arrived the way he always arrived, with authority announced before questions were asked. His patrol car pulled up hard to the curb, and he crossed the sidewalk toward Philip with the kind of momentum that didn't leave room for explanation. His hand rested on his service weapon. His jaw was set. His eyes went directly to the shopping bag before they went anywhere else. He demanded to know where Philip had gotten the sneakers. The question was not a question. It was an accusation with a question mark attached, loud enough to pull the attention of everyone within 30 feet. Philip stood up from the bench, cautious, confused, still holding the bag, and reached into his pocket for the receipt he had been handed 12 minutes earlier inside the store. He extended it toward Perry. Perry didn't take it. Didn't look at it. Told Philip to put it away. The accusation came next, delivered at volume. There was no world in which a teenager dressed the way Philip was dressed walked out of Elite Soul Gallery with a legitimate purchase. Perry said it in the particular tone of someone who had already decided the outcome of the conversation and was simply filling in the remaining steps. Philip tried again, explaining that he had paid, that the transaction was documented, that the employee who processed the sale was steps away inside the building. Perry cut him off. What happened in the next 90 seconds was mechanical and fast. Perry spun Philip around, forced his arms behind his back, and snapped the handcuffs onto his wrists with enough pressure to leave red marks on both. The shopping bag hit the concrete. Perry's foot connected with it as he turned, sending it skidding several feet across the sidewalk. The box inside shifted. Philip didn't resist. He stood still, breathing hard, looking at the ground. From the edge of the scene, Diana Larson watched. She had positioned herself slightly apart from the gathering crowd, close enough to observe, far enough to perform distance from the spectacle she had created. Her arms were folded across her chest. The expression on her face was not distress or concern. It was the unmistakable look of someone who had expected exactly this outcome and was satisfied to see it confirmed. She announced to no one in particular that the sneakers in that bag cost over $15,000, and that anyone with eyes could see the teenager in front of them hadn't come by them honestly. Several people in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Phones were already out. What the crowd watching that arrest did not know, what Perry didn't know, what Larson couldn't have known, was what it had taken Philip to get to that bus stop. Philip Worrell was not a teenager who drew attention to himself. He had spent 18 years being exactly the kind of person that rooms tend to look past. Soft-spoken, always in plain clothes, backpack worn on one shoulder, head angled slightly down. At school he was the steady, unnoticed one, consistent grades, no disciplinary record, no orbit of admiration. At the grocery store where he worked evening and weekend shifts, stocking shelves in the back aisles, managers had to check the schedule to remember his name. His extended family had a running joke about his quietness, the kind of joke that adults tell children when they can't identify what makes them interesting. But Philip had been running a private calculation for 10 months. It had started with a pair of limited edition sneakers he had seen announced online, a collaboration between a designer and an athlete, released in quantities so small that most people who wanted them would never get them. The retail price was $15,000. For most 18-year-olds, that number was a wall. For Philip, it became a target. The arrangement with his parents had been simple and exact. If he maintained his grades and worked his shifts consistently through the end of senior year, they would match what he saved. Philip had worked out the math. If he contributed $7,000 of his own money, his parents would cover the rest as his 18th birthday gift. The deal asked nothing dramatic of him. It asked the thing he was already best at, showing up, doing the work, and saying nothing about it. He had stocked shelves through winter break while his friends were at parties. He had picked up extra shifts on Friday evenings. He had skipped things he would have liked to do and said nothing about having skipped them. He had watched his savings account, which he checked more often than anyone knew, grow toward a number that had once seemed impossible. By spring, he had saved over $7,000. His GPA held at a 3.3. His parents had been proud and had kept their end. The sneakers he reserved at Elite Soul Gallery had been researched for months. He had called ahead to confirm his size was in stock. He had shown up that Saturday in his usual clothes, plain black t-shirt, worn jeans, old sneakers that had been carrying him through 2 years of evening shifts, because he had not thought about what he was wearing. He had been thinking about the purchase. Inside the store, the transaction had taken less than 15 minutes. The employee who served him, Teresa Beck, 4 years at the boutique, professional in the way that came from treating every customer the same regardless of what they were wearing, had processed the payment cleanly, boxed the sneakers in tissue paper, shook Philip's hand, and wished him a happy birthday. He had walked out into the afternoon sun holding the bag in one hand and his phone in the other, already typing the message to his parents. He had earned this. All of it. In the only way he knew how to earn anything, by doing it quietly, without announcement, until it was done. Back at the bus stop, the crowd had grown to 24 people. The whispers moved through it in the pattern they always moved, assumption building on assumption, each person borrowing confidence from the last. A teenager in handcuffs outside a luxury boutique. An officer. A bag on the ground. The math seemed to do itself. Philip stood on the sidewalk with his wrists bound behind him, the afternoon sun pressing flat and hot against the back of his neck. The humiliation was physical, not just the cuffs, not just the crowd, but the particular exposure of being made into a spectacle in a city that had no idea who he was or what he had done to get here. 10 months of invisible discipline had delivered him to this exact, public moment of being treated as though he had nothing. He had saved $7,000 in 2 years. The receipt proving it was 3 feet away on the ground. The murmuring from the crowd had settled into something like consensus. Diana Larson stood with her arms still folded, satisfied. And then, through the plate glass window of Elite Soul Gallery, Teresa Beck looked up. She had been gathering her things at the end of her shift. She heard the voices before she registered their meaning. When she looked out through the window, she went still. The shopping bag, her store's bag, the one she had packed herself, the one she had handed to the quiet teenager who had just wished her a good afternoon, was lying on the sidewalk in the gutter. And the teenager it belonged to was standing in handcuffs, eyes fixed on the concrete, 20 feet from the store where he had paid $15,000 for what was legally, receipted, and completely his. Teresa Beck set her jacket back down on the counter. She pushed through the glass doors. Teresa Beck moved through the crowd the way someone moves when they have already decided what they are going to do and are not interested in being talked out of it. She pushed past 2 people who had stopped on the sidewalk to record, stepped around the edge of the gathering, and came to a stop directly in front of Officer Victor Perry with the particular stillness of someone who had nothing to be afraid of. She had worked 4 years at Elite Soul Gallery. In that time she had served customers who arrived in chauffeur-driven cars and customers who arrived on foot, customers in designer suits and customers in worn work clothes, and she had treated each of them with the same professional consistency because that was what the job required and because it was also simply who she was. She had processed hundreds of high-value transactions. She knew what a legitimate sale looked like. She had processed one herself, for this exact customer, 18 minutes before the handcuffs went on. Perry turned to face her. His expression moved from surprise to irritation in the space of a second. He told her to step back. She didn't. She stated her name, her role at the store, and the facts of the transaction in the level, unhurried voice of someone giving a deposition, the customer's name, the item purchased, the method of payment, the time the receipt was printed. She told Perry that the sale was documented, that the store's security system had captured every moment of it on both interior and exterior cameras, and that she was prepared to walk him through all of it immediately. Then she raised her phone and began recording. Perry's response was physical. He stepped toward her, his voice rising above the ambient noise of the crowd, warning her that interfering with an active police matter was a criminal offense. The threat was specific and loud enough to be heard by everyone watching. Teresa did not lower the phone. She did not step back. She held it at a steady angle and continued documenting, and the crowd, which had been watching the scene with the uncertainty of people who weren't sure whose side to be on, began to recalibrate. Perry reached for the phone. He was faster than she anticipated. The device was out of her hand before she could adjust her grip. The recording stopped, the footage gone. He said something about the investigation and handed it back. Teresa looked at the blank screen. Then she looked at Perry. Then she said the name. Larry Carter. She told him who owned the store he was standing in front of. She didn't deliver the name dramatically. She stated it the way you state a material fact, clearly, once, without embellishment, and let it carry its own weight. The name was not unknown to Victor Perry. In a department where legal exposure had become a recurring institutional problem, Larry Carter's name appeared in briefings and cautionary conversations and the kind of quiet institutional memory that accumulated around cases the city had lost badly. Carter had sued twice in 5 years. Both times the settlements had been substantial. Both times officers had lost their careers. His attorneys were considered aggressive and meticulous, and his resources were not the kind that ran out before discovery. Perry's posture shifted. It was not dramatic. It was the small, recognizable adjustment of a person recalculating risk in real time, a slight loosening at the shoulders, a fractional softening of the jaw. His eyes moved from Teresa to Philip, then back. And then Philip Worrell, who had been standing in handcuffs without resistance for several minutes, still looking at the concrete, raised his head. He didn't raise his voice. The sentence he spoke was quiet enough that only the people nearest to him heard it clearly, but what it contained was not quiet at all. He told Perry that Larry Carter was his uncle. That the store they were standing in front of belonged to his family. And that the reason no one had known this, not the crowd, not Teresa when she first greeted him, not Perry when he arrived and made his assessment, was because Philip had specifically chosen not to use that fact. He had wanted to earn the sneakers on terms that were entirely his own. He had wanted the accomplishment to mean something that couldn't be explained away by access or inheritance or a last name that opened doors. He had spent 10 months building something that belonged only to him, dressed the same way he always dressed, arriving without announcement, asking for nothing he hadn't worked for. The silence that followed was brief. Teresa confirmed it without being asked. She had known for some time, though Philip had never brought it up directly. She had respected it. The confirmation landed in the air around them and the crowd absorbed it in stages, the shift visible in the way people looked at Philip, then at Perry, then at the shopping bag still lying in the gutter several feet away. Perry unlocked the handcuffs. He did it quickly, without ceremony, without eye contact. He muttered something that gestured toward the concept of a misunderstanding, a word that acknowledged nothing specific and apologized for nothing at all, and pointed vaguely in Diana Larson's direction as though the origin of events was a matter of ongoing debate. Then he walked back to his patrol car. He did not turn on the lights when he pulled away from the curb. Diana Larson had already begun moving. She had tracked the shift in the crowd's attention with the practiced awareness of someone who understood that the moment the narrative reversed, she needed to not be standing at the center of it. She turned and walked quickly in the other direction, phone pressed to her ear, performing urgency. 2 people in the crowd said her name out loud. Several continued recording as she left. None of what was on those phones had been deleted. Philip sat back down on the bench. His wrists bore the red lines where the cuffs had been. His hands were not entirely steady. The shopping bag had been retrieved from the gutter and placed beside him, the tissue paper inside shifted but the box intact. He sat with his forearms resting on his knees and looked at the bag for a long moment, at the logo printed across the front, at the handle he had been holding with quiet pride less than half an hour ago. If you have ever watched someone be treated as a suspect for simply succeeding, type "justice now" in the comments. And if this story is reaching you for the first time, share it. These moments happen when no one is recording. This one was caught. Teresa crouched beside him. She asked for his number and his parents' contact information. He gave them to her. She told him it wasn't over, not as consolation, but as a statement of intent. Then she stepped a short distance away and dialed Larry Carter. Carter answered before the second ring. Teresa spoke for less than 3 minutes. She described what had happened in sequence, without editorializing: the arrest, the refusal to examine the receipt, the crowd, Perry's aggression, the deleted footage from her phone, and the exterior cameras that had captured all of it in higher resolution than anything a bystander had recorded. Carter's side of the call was quiet. When she finished, he asked 2 questions. Then he told her to send him everything within the hour. Carter sat with what he had just been told for a long time after the call ended. He was not a man who made decisions quickly out of emotion. He had learned, over years of building businesses and fighting legal battles, that the most effective response to injustice was not the fastest one. It was the most documented one. He pulled up his security system remotely and began reviewing the footage from both cameras. The interior recording showed the complete transaction: Philip entering the store, the sneakers being brought out, the payment processing, the handshake, the exit. 14 minutes and 23 seconds of clean, unambiguous evidence. The exterior recording showed the rest. It showed Perry arriving. It showed the accusation delivered before a single question was asked. It showed Philip reaching for his receipt and being cut off. It showed the handcuffs going on, the bag hitting the ground, and Diana Larson's expression during all of it, an expression that the camera had captured in enough detail to be unmistakable. Carter watched the exterior footage twice. Then he called his attorney. Marcus Reed had worked civil rights law for 19 years. He had reviewed footage of police misconduct in conference rooms, on laptops, on phones at midnight, in the specific recurring posture of a man who had seen too many variations of the same fact pattern to be surprised by any of them. What Carter sent him that evening was, by any legal standard, among the cleaner cases he had encountered, not because the injustice was subtle, but because the documentation was not. The exterior security camera had done something Perry's deletion of Teresa's phone footage could not undo. It had recorded everything in high resolution from a fixed angle, with a timestamped data overlay that placed each moment in exact sequence. Perry's failure to request or examine the receipt was captured. The physical handling of Philip during the arrest was captured. Diana Larson's movements, her posture, her expression, and the precise moment she interjected to reinforce Perry's assumptions, all of it was on file, time-coded, and legally defensible. Reed filed within the week. The complaints were specific and multiple. Against Perry, false arrest, excessive use of authority, and civil rights violations under federal statute. Against Diana Larson, filing a false police report, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought from Larson alone totaled $150,000. The filing against Perry was forwarded simultaneously to the department's Internal Affairs Division with a formal demand for investigation. The footage was released to media the following day. What happened next unfolded with the compressed velocity that characterized cases where the visual evidence was unambiguous and the subject was already loaded with public recognition. The clip ran across every major platform within 36 hours. The exterior camera footage, edited to 2 minutes and 40 seconds, was viewed 11 million times in the first 4 days. The headlines wrote themselves from the content: a teenager in handcuffs at a bus stop, a receipt on the ground, an officer who never looked at it. The comment sections, the news segments, the opinion columns, all of them circled the same detail. Not the outcome. The moment. The moment Philip reached for the receipt and Perry told him to put it away. What the coverage also surfaced, through the parallel work of journalists reviewing public records, was the longer context that made the moment possible. Perry's personnel file, obtained through a records request, contained 5 formal complaints over 12 years, each describing a version of the same behavior, each investigated and closed with a written warning that changed nothing. His stop data, compiled by a researcher covering the department, showed that of 63 stops over 3 years that resulted in no citation and no enforcement action, 58 had involved Black or Latino individuals. The department had the data. It had been filed, reviewed, and set aside. Larson's history emerged through different channels. Former neighbors, reached by reporters, described a pattern that predated the call she made outside Elite Soul Gallery by several years. 911 reports about a black delivery driver, a black family in a public park, black teenagers walking through a neighborhood where they lived. Each call had been logged. None had resulted in action against Larson. The pattern had cost her nothing, until now. Perry's termination came 3 weeks after the filing. The official findings documented his history of racially disparate stops, his failure to conduct basic verification before making an arrest, and his conduct during the incident, including the destruction of a witness's recording. He was 43 years old. His law enforcement career ended on a Tuesday morning without ceremony. He applied to 3 neighboring departments over the following months. Each background check reached the same record. None of them called him back. Private security followed the same trajectory, ending when employers searched his name and found the footage. He settled into night shifts at a warehouse distribution facility, his 12 years on the force reduced to a cautionary exhibit in the training materials of departments trying to insulate themselves from the liability he represented. Larson's civil trial lasted 4 days. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. The evidence, the 911 recording, the security footage, the witness testimony, the documented pattern, left the verdict without meaningful ambiguity. $150,000. Larson had no mechanism to absorb it. Legal fees had preceded the judgment. The settlement's weight pressed against a financial foundation that wasn't built to hold it. She filed for bankruptcy 6 weeks later, sold her home, and relocated to a state where her name was slightly less indexed to the coverage. It followed her anyway, in the particular permanent way that public records follow people who become symbols of something the culture has decided to remember. The reforms Larry Carter negotiated as part of the broader settlement were procedural and specific: mandatory verification before arrest in cases originating from third-party calls, independent review of all racial profiling complaints, structured tracking of stop data by demographic, automatic flagging of officers whose no-action stop rates exceeded documented thresholds. The changes took effect across the department 14 months after the incident. Over the following 4 years, racially disparate stops declined by 68%. The number was cited in 2 subsequent legal cases as evidence that reform was achievable when accountability was structural rather than symbolic. Philip Worrell used his portion of the settlement to pay for college. He enrolled in a business program, kept the same unassuming presence he had always carried, and graduated with honors in 4 years. He established a small scholarship fund for students the system tended to overlook, the quiet ones, the consistent ones, the ones whose discipline ran deeper than their visibility. He gave occasional interviews when asked, describing what had happened at the bus stop in the same measured tone he had used standing in handcuffs that afternoon, neither dramatizing the experience nor diminishing it. He said, when pressed, that the worst part had not been the handcuffs or the crowd. It had been the moment he reached for the receipt and was told it didn't matter. 5 years after the arrest, the sneakers still sat on a shelf in his apartment. He had never worn them outside again. They had been cleaned and reboxed and placed where he could see them, not as a trophy, but as a fixed point. A record of what 10 months of silent work had built, and what one afternoon had tried to unmake, and what the long, documented, unglamorous process of accountability had ultimately restored. The receipt was still in the box. He had kept that too.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it. And let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.